In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain. And Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their relationship, cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet, behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of: successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past. But old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school, where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience while figuring out her next steps. She impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nonna's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. As they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in, not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour. and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed. It started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot, besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp, autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior. It all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage, and as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay, quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall, and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, He meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning, when Zara was relaxed and off guard, to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, she would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread, but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers. But as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara, and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men and her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic, fueled by early success in his stock market gambles. He talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began, the kitchen of the restaurant. The night that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Zara tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table, and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work, as the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Zara, advised by her lawyer, and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement, eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hard-working businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by those directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls.